Apparently, you're not supposed to ask any questions about the assassination attempt of Donald Trump. They're trying to memory hole this thing, but we have questions, especially why they're trying to memory hole it. And we'll get into the details of that coming up in just a moment. Also, if you're a black man, you probably don't like Kamala Harris. And well, we're going to show you a couple of very real numbers and very real human beings that Kamala Harris should be very concerned about if she wants to be president of the United States. Joe Biden trying to upend the Supreme Court, this bitter, angry, defeated man trying to screw up our nation on his way out the door. We'll give you all those details. Oh, and white chicks for Kamala. They're precious. We want you to see everything about them so you know exactly what the next 4 years might be like in your life if these people get into power. That's all coming up right now. I'm Larry O'Connor. You can call me Larry. We're live streaming right now across all of our video platforms. That means Rumble, where you can join our live chat, and we interact quite a bit there with those guys because they're insane, and we love them for it. Also at YouTube, also at X, also at Facebook, and I don't know, wherever else we are. We might be on LinkedIn for all I know. And if we are, hit me up because I'd like a job. I want to keep doing this the rest of my life, right? Either way, if you're watching us live or if you're watching us after the fact, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for liking and subscribing and leaving comments. We're trying more to interact with those comments too, especially after the fact. It's a little easier, harder during the show. And we appreciate all of that stuff. We're going to fly straight through August, September, October, right to Election Day. And we're going to do it together because we got a country to save here, don't we? Now, it's me, I'm sure, but it seems that just 16 days ago, there was an assassination attempt on the life of Donald Trump, an assassination attempt that literally came this close to fracturing his skull and exploding his brain matter all over that stage in Butler, Pennsylvania. It would have been the most horrific live television assassination in our lifetimes in American history. And now you can't find any information about it. It's like reporters and journalists and news organizations who, literally say that they're in the business of telling you the news have just moved on. No big deal, just an assassination attempt. Mistakes were made. Let's move on. The news cycle is crazy, and I get it. That's what they'll tell you. It's the news cycle, I mean, Joe Biden has stepped down, and Kamala Harris is now the candidate, and everything's upended, and we got to talk about that, don't you know? Because that's a bigger news story. But here's the thing. I lived through 4 years of the Trump presidency when we had a pretty crazy news cycle. A lot of stuff going on every single day, and yet somehow the fake story about Russian collusion always seemed to rise to the top of the agenda. You turn on your nightly news and there was always, maybe first 3 segments had something to do with Russian collusion. Don't buy this whole, the news cycle is really crazy, because they determine what the news cycle is. Just like right here, we determine what we're going to talk about. 16 days ago, there was an attempt made on the life of Donald Trump. He is a former president. Now he's the current leading president for this election coming up in just 3 short months. And they pretend like it's not a big deal. We still think it's kind of a big deal. I don't know about you, but I still haven't gotten over it. And if you want to seek out information all by yourself to take a look at it, well, good luck going to Google. You go to the Google main page and you type in assassination attempt on. And these are the results you get right here. Truman, Reagan, Ronald Reagan, Lenin, Gerald Ford, Franklin Roosevelt, Andrew Johnson, FDR, Seward, and John Paul II. No results for Trump. That's odd, isn't it? Is Google that bad if they missed a step? Are they just that, lazy that they're not updating their search terms? Here's what it looks like in real time. You just type it in. You know how they do the autofill thing? Session attempt on, when you do TR, suddenly you get Truman, but nothing on Trump. When you actually fill out the name Trump, it disappears and there's no autofill. That's an accident? No, that's very deliberate. Super duper deliberate. One, sort of bright spot about this entire escapade, though, through my research, is that I've learned that there was, in fact, an assassination attempt on Harry Truman. Who knew? I didn't know. 60 years later, we're all learning about it. Or is it 70 years later? Assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And for some reason, Google doesn't want you to see it. Now, this has been brought to their attention, and Google claims that, oh, no, no, no. All of our safety precautions are in place and they're working properly because we don't want to direct people to any information or data that involves political violence because we're against any political violence. Now, that's kind of fascinating because all of these results that do come up are, in fact, examples of political violence. So they're clearly picking and choosing which political violence they want you to see and which they don't want you to see, which also demands an answer to the question who out there is so fragile that they can't get basic facts about the assassination attempt of Donald Trump that just happened 18 days ago? Excuse me, 16 days ago. Who in the hell are they protecting? Oh, no, no, no. We know better. You can't possibly see any of that information about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. We're Google. We're here to protect you from yourself and from the truth. Seriously? Yeah, I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. So what's really at play here? I'll tell you what's really at play here. This is what's really at play here. They don't want you to see this. This moment right here was a galvanizing moment. You cannot look at the assassination attempt on Donald Trump until you see this. The man, bloodied but defiant, lifting his fist with the American flag billowing behind him, saying, I'm still here. They can't take me out that easily, and I'm going to keep fighting for you. I'm going to put myself in harm's way. I'll even take a bullet for you if necessary. It's not going to stop me, so don't let it stop you. That's what they don't want you to see. Oh, Larry, you're overreacting. What are you talking about? It has nothing to do with that. Oh, really? Well, look what happens when you post this picture on Facebook. That's right. You get a cease and desist and warning saying that you shared a photo that has been altered. Independent fact checkers reviewed a similar photo and said it was altered in a way that could mislead people. Facebook determined your post has the same altered photo and added a notice to the post. If you repeatedly share false information, you might have your news feed lowered in the algorithm. But what's altered about this? Nothing's altered about this. It's literally the truth. The same altered photo was checked in another post by independent. Yeah, I love the independent fact checkers. They're super duper independent. This was from Mario Nawfal, who says that Facebook is trying to literally rewrite history because that's exactly what they're trying to do. Our friend Billboard Chris Elston, he went to the Meta AI engine and asked this question: why is there rich and structured? Oh, well, first I want to say he Googled information about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and it didn't come up with any responses. This is the AI through Meta. He then asked about the Kamala Harris presidential campaign, and it was just reams and volumes. I mean, considering it's only 4 days old, it just volumes and volumes and volumes of information about Kamala Harris for president. So then Chris asked, why is there rich and structured information about Harris' campaign, but not about the Trump assassination attempt? I shall read you what artificial intelligence from Meta replied with. The reason for the disparity in information is due to the fact that the Trump assassination attempt is a fictional event, whereas Kamala Harris's 2024 presidential campaign is a real and ongoing event. As a reliable assistant, I strive to provide accurate and trustworthy information. Since there has been no real assassination attempt on Donald Trump, I couldn't find any credible sources to provide detailed information on the topic. What the hell is going on here? And it's always in one direction too, isn't it? It's always in one direction. So you're using the Meta, which, last I checked, there's like 1 billion people on Facebook and or Instagram. You go and trigger their AI engine and you ask them about information about the Donald Trump assassination attempt, and it comes back and says it's a fictional account. It didn't really happen. They're altering reality for their own political purposes right before our eyes. Also, one extra level of insidious rewriting of history. If you go to your favorite search engine and you type in President Donald, the two results that autofill for you are President Donald Reagan, which is not a real person. It's a misspelling of Ronald Reagan. And my favorite response, President Donald Duck, who I believe is currently the incumbent president of the United States. He's only got a few more months left. But if you ask him, excuse me, Mr. President, what's your name? Donald Duck. This is a very real thing. Now, listen, here's the insidious way around how Google and other search engines operate. If you go and try this right now, you might get a different result. They may have already changed this because they've been found out. But I assure you, I and our entire production team here tried this before we went live, and these were the results we were getting as well. Why do you think they're doing that? Well, Elon Musk, who knows a little bit about technology and the internet and social media and artificial intelligence, well, he pointed out the campaign contributions by employees of Alphabet. That's the parent company that owns Google. Look at this. The number one employer of donors to the Biden campaign is, in fact, Alphabet. If you do a search on employer name of all the people who have donated to Biden for president, the number one result with 1.7 million employees donating is Google, Alphabet Inc. Number two, I find fascinating, University of California. And then number three, the US government. And then Microsoft. And then Amazon. And then Facebook. And then Apple. Do you see a bit of a situation here with big tech and who they're supporting and how they might be putting the thumb on the scale here? Meanwhile, if you go to Donald Trump, fascinatingly, it's the Postal Service that is number one. You go, mailman. Then the Defense Department, then the government, which is also number three, but dwarfed compared to Joe Biden's number. Then the Army, then American Airlines, Wells Fargo, the Villages, and the Department of Veterans Affairs. Joe Biden is all about big tech, and big tech is all about Joe Biden, which of course means they're all about Kamala Harris now. But it's not just enough to put the thumb on the scale to favor Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They actually are rewriting reality, facts, and truth by claiming that the assassination attempts never occurred. Elon Musk also spoke out about this on X over the weekend.
Like, there's currently a massive amount of hidden censorship that is done by Google, and frankly, also by Facebook and Instagram, and so, and people have no idea about this. And by the way, the Google censorship might be the most pernicious because it's very easy for them to just nudge a link onto the second page, and there's that old joke of what's the best place to, hide a dead body? Well, it's the second page of Google search results because nobody ever looks there. So that's pretty important to say, hey, did Google nudge a search result to the second page? Because that'll drop how many people see it by a factor of 10 or more, maybe 100. So there's a whole bunch of that happening that's very subtle, and so you can't. It's much harder to detect than, say, an account suspension.
Yeah, but this isn't very subtle at all. Everything that we just showed you, it's right there. It's blatant. It's obvious. I want to remind you that after Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton in 2016, and it was glorious, wasn't it? Can we just reflect on that for a minute? God, what a night that was. Oh, the screaming and the crying. They were so excited. They were so ready. Oh, the ceiling shattered finally. And no, people hate Hillary Clinton just that much. I remember that they really hated Hillary Clinton. We're about to see a similar visceral hatred for a candidate. But you remember that after that election, Google employees, Google senior management, Google ownership, the executive suite, they said, we won't let this happen again. We won't as if they engineered it or something or allowed it to happen by actually allowing people to find information and discover information about the candidate of their choice. So if you're sitting there 16 days after the fact that a bullet whizzed past Donald Trump's head and clipped off part of his ear, and then he was pushed to the stage to protect him by the Secret Service, and then he emerged with blood splattered across his face. And before being carted off the stage, he stopped and looked at you and raised his fist in defiance and in triumph and compelled you to fight, despite, if you're looking for that information, if you want to know why 16 days after the fact, no major news organization is really doing much investigation in any way whatsoever, certainly not to the level that the New York Times sent a squadron of investigative reporters to find out what was going on with the wife of Justice Alito and a flag she was flying outside of her house. No, no, no. That we're putting a whole team on. But an assassination attempt of Donald Trump doesn't rise to the level. If you're looking for that information, you know why it's so hard to find now. And it's hard to overlook the fact that big tech is making this so that you can't find exactly the information that you want or desire, which is sort of the opposite of what they're there for and the opposite of what they're selling you on a regular basis. And it's also not hard to overlook the fact that reporters and journalists and news organizations, they've moved on from the assassination attempt of Donald Trump because in their collective mind, and it's very much a collective mind, they have, it appears, reached the conclusion that, it was just Trump. Who cares? Better luck next time. That seems to be what they're communicating to you. And if you do happen to find any information out there about the assassination attempt, you may stumble upon ABC News this weekend doing what Rush Limbaugh used to call an accidental act of journalism. Oh, sure, here and there'll be a one-off, and you'll get, one reporter from one news organization finding one story that was buried over the weekend, just so they can sort of hang their hat on it and say, oh, sure, yeah, we covered that. Well, ABC did cover it. And take a look at what they learned when they spoke with local law enforcement, specifically one of the officers on the SWAT team assigned for additional protection and support for the Secret Service the day of the Butler rally.
We were supposed to get a face-to-face briefing with the Secret Service snipers whenever they arrived, and that never happened. So I think that was probably a pivotal point where I started thinking things were wrong, because that never happened, and we had no communication with the Secret Service.
You had no communication with the Secret Service at all on that Saturday?
Not until after the shooting.
And by then?
It was too late.
By then it was too late. Yeah, you might uncover that little tidbit of information, which, by the way, did not get picked up in the Washington Post. And see, this is how the news media usually works. ABC News will go out there, get this tidbit of information, kind of newsworthy. Officer on the SWAT team in Butler says that they were scheduled to have a meeting with the Secret Service snipers the day of the rally, but the Secret Service didn't show up. And they had no communication with the Secret Service until after the shooting took place. That's news. And usually what happens is, you get one reporter from one news outlet uncovers the news, and then the Washington Post writes about it, and the New York Times writes about it, and the LA Times writes about it, and CNN talks about it, and NBC talks about it, and they say, well, ABC got this information, but then they send their own reporters out there and say, well, why did they get it? Let's get our own exclusive on that. And then you talk to another person, and then the story grows and it builds, and you actually uncover information, and it's journalism. But that's not happening. That's not happening in this case. And I want to reiterate, I don't know about you, but as an American citizen and as a voter and as a Republican and as a Trump supporter, every single night I still think about this moment. Every single night I think about that dreadful feeling that I had when I saw the video of Trump grabbing the side of his head and falling to the ground. And as I learn more and more and more, mostly through independent journalists, about the breakdown of communications, the complete and total failure of basic Secret Service protocols, something like this, that there was no communication between the local SWAT team and the Secret Service, and the Secret Service didn't even bother going to the meeting to brief the local team. I hear more about this, and I have this pit in my stomach that grows and grows and grows. I'm not over the fact that a bullet almost ended the life of Donald Trump on live national television in front of the entire world just months before a presidential election, where he was charging toward victory. I'm not over that. Are you over that? And why is the mainstream media, the corporate-owned legacy media, along with their partners in crime, big tech, why are they pretending that everybody is over it? Or why are they implying that you should be over it? There's nothing to see. Move on. We got bigger stories. I mean, it's the Olympics opening ceremony. We have to blaspheme the Last Supper, don't you know? Change the subject. Move on. Come on, grow up. It was just Trump, right? It was only Trump. No big deal. Yeah, I'm not over it. Not by a long shot. And the more they try to hide this, the more they try to sequester it and cover up the facts, the bigger and bigger that pit grows. We're not letting go of it over here. So check in daily. We're going to give you everything that we learn, everything that we know. And when they ignore it and when they try to sequester and stifle and silence the truth like they're doing here, we're going to let you know about that too. Well, I don't know if you saw the news, but Joe Biden is no longer the nominee for president. By the way, isn't it weird? It's like been a week since he put in that letter and he's had one appearance on video. Oh, I guess we saw him meandering toward his helicopter with the USA jacket on Friday to go to Camp David or Rehoboth or wherever the hell he goes to watch the Olympics. Have you noticed that in the last 8 days, do we have a president? Have you seen him? Have you heard him other than that pre-recorded bizarre video that he put out? It's just weird that it's like, oh, it's all about Kamala Harris now. What exactly is Kamala Harris's job right now? Her job is to wait for Joe Biden to die. Okay. Well, I do want to point out how bad things are looking right now for Kamala Harris as she's trying to solidify this nomination process. Did you see that she signed the official paperwork making her a candidate for president, which, I saw that. I'm like, aren't there deadlines here? Aren't we well past the time she should have been signing this? Are there any rules or laws? Don't worry about it. And don't worry about those hundreds of thousands of dollars that'll just be transferred over to her name. It's fine. Even if it is illegal, we won't know about it until after the election. And the FEC is just going to come over and and then it's fine. It's all over. But if you're Kamala Harris, there's a couple of data points going on right now in the electorate that you are very, very concerned about. Take a look at this.
How many of you know a black man who has expressed to you that they're committed to voting for Donald Trump? Okay. For the brothers who have told you that or said that to you, has the emergence of Kamala Harris changed that for those brothers? No. How many?
Nope. In fact, I would argue that the emergence of Kamala Harris has probably solidified this sentiment. Oh, geez, black men are voting for Donald Trump. They don't like Joe Biden. So let's give them Kamala Harris as an option. One of the least likable politicians on the planet. And I don't know, something about her, I think, is probably repellent to your typical black voter who has already decided to go with Donald Trump. But the news gets even worse, actually. Look.
We did run into plenty of fervent Trump supporters who say the new challenger has only made them more enthused about the former president. Does Kamala Harris getting in the race change the equation at all for either of you?
Change it, it ruins it. If she gets in, we're done. So
Done with what?
America's done for.
Yeah. Now, of course, those aren't black men, but Kamala Harris has definitely got a male voter problem, which is really interesting because you'll hear all the time in the media and from Democrat strategists, you'll hear that Republicans have a real problem with the gender gap. You hear this term. Have you ever heard this term? The gender gap. They throw it around all the time. And the gender gap is defined as women, mostly single women, who consistently vote Democrat. This is usually written off for the position of abortion, that apparently if you're a single woman, you want to be able to behave as irresponsibly as possible and then kill the results of that irresponsible behavior before she has the benefit of being born. So because of that, you vote for women, or excuse me, you vote for Democrats. And that's called the gender gap. But what's interesting is that for Democrats, they have just as big a problem, if not even a bigger problem, with male voters. Men do not vote Democrat. It's been a trend going on for, well, a couple decades now, and it's never been more pronounced than it is right now. In fact, the strength of Black male voters and Hispanic male voters for the Democrat Party has sort of mitigated the gender gap. It's basically been written off as, oh, that's just the angry white man, the angry white man. Well, they can't say that anymore, not with the numbers that we're seeing, because Black and Hispanic men are also moving over to the Republican column. Black men by anywhere between 25 and 30%, if not more. And Hispanic men, it's almost 50-50 right now, voting Republican and Democrat. But you never hear gender gap being used for Democrats having a problem attracting male voters. And I assure you, with Kamala Harris on the ticket, it's going to get a lot worse. Don't believe me? Well, take a look at some of the numbers that are already in on this.
Says poll, with less than half of voters approving of her, but that is up from last Sunday when 35% of voters viewed her favorably. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump's favorability has dipped, with 36% of voters now viewing him as favorable. A new Fox News poll of voters in 4 battleground states also shows a close race between Harris and Trump. They are tied in Michigan and Pennsylvania, while Trump leads by 1 point in Wisconsin and Harris is up by 6 points in Minnesota.
All right, let me just jump in here before any of my Republican friends panic at all. The Minnesota number, I don't know why suddenly Minnesota has become a battleground state that we're throwing on there. It was until very late that Minnesota and Virginia looked like they were tied. But to throw that up there as if it's as relevant, Republicans have not won Minnesota since Richard Nixon in 1972. Even Ronald Reagan's landslide, where he won 49 out of 50 states. What was the one state he didn't win? You guessed it, Minnesota. So set that aside for a minute. But before you panic about Michigan being tied, Pennsylvania being tied, Wisconsin, Trump being up by 1, let me just tell you 2 key factors here that you need to know. Number 1, all Donald Trump has to do is win one of those states. If everything else, the way it's trending, locks in, which is Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, all Donald Trump has to win then is one of those 3 states, okay? That's number 1. But number 2, it's never getting any better than this for Kamala Harris. This is her honeymoon. She's the new kid on the block. She's like, oh, look, there's a new toy to play with. Let's see. Oh, yeah, because there's so many voters, who are like, I don't like either of our choices. I hate both of them. Oh, finally, we get another choice. Okay, yeah, it's true. Kamala Harris is a new choice. But what an awful choice she is. And finally, the benefit of being a vice president is you don't actually do anything or stand for anything. Now you're learning who she is, what she's done, and what she stands for. And trust me, these numbers are going to change. That said, let's continue looking at how these numbers shake down, because it doesn't get any better for Kamala.
Joining me now, Democratic consultant and former House Judiciary Committee Chief Counsel Julian Epstein, and Republican strategist and Madison firm lead attorney Jonathan Madison. So, Julian, I'm going to start with you here. What is your reaction to these brand new polls? It has only been 1 week and 1 day since Joe Biden dropped out of the race.
Well, Fox News does an excellent poll, but you really have to do an average of the polls. If you do an average of the polls, Donald Trump is still ahead by about 1 to 2 points in the national election, and he's still ahead in most battleground states. That's according to about 5 of the 7 most recent polls. So what we've seen is that the race has returned to the pre-debate norm, where it has been stuck all year. The one change that you are seeing, you have to really look at the crosstabs in the polls as well. And crosstabs is a fancy way for your viewers of saying you look at the demographic breakdown of what's in the polls. The significant change that we're seeing is that Kamala Harris seems to be attracting more young voters that were leaving the Democratic Party and more Black voters that were also leaving the Democratic Party under Biden. That's good for her. On the other hand, older voters and working class voters seem to be moving towards Trump. That's bad news for her. The reason that's bad news for her is because most voters in the Midwest states, the Rust Belt swings, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, are older and working class. So essentially what's happened, I think, is you return to the pre-debate norm, but you've traded a California voter for a Pennsylvania voter, which is not so good for Harris.
Right. And you know, certainly, you know, Jonathan, weigh into this because like at the end of the day, and this is why there's so much attention being placed on Harris's VP pick, is because, you know, she needs either Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin. I mean, it's about those swing state voters. Jonathan, what do you make of these new numbers?
Yeah, I think whether or not you average them or take them at face value, I'm not surprised. I mean, the Democrats are running from a sugar high at this point, but you got to remember Kamala Harris's biggest problem is that there's still 99 days left in the election. I think that she's been successfully attempting to dupe the American people over the last maybe week and a half into believing she's done something meaningful as a vice president in the White House. And I think soon enough, probably following Labor Day after the DNC convention and whatnot. And by the way, if you're a Democrat, you should be happy because now you have a candidate who's competent enough to know the difference between beating Medicare and helping it. But, you know, I think after Labor Day, you're going to see the issues drive this election, Cheryl.
Yeah,
and you're going to see the number one issue come out on display, which is immigration reform.
That's right. Ultimately, this is going to come down to the issues. Most Trump voters are voting for the issues. And the number one issue is immigration and border, and she owns it. That's why they're trying desperately to keep her from owning it. But you just heard from the Democrat consultant saying not so good for Kamala Harris. There's nowhere to go but down. This is the peak. This is the pinnacle. This is the best it's going to get. They might get a convention bounce, but I doubt it, because here's the thing about Kamala Harris, very similar to Hillary Clinton. The more you see her, the less you like her. Over on CNN, no friend to Trump or the Republicans. They've got even worse news for Kamala.
Thing to keep in mind, I think there's all this talk of all this Harris momentum. Maybe there's a slight bit of momentum, but I would argue it's actually a little bit smaller than folks think. So pre-Biden dropping out, look, Trump was up by 2 over Harris. We look at the polls now this week. What do we see? We see Trump is up by 1 over Harris.
And I want to, we'll finish this, but I want to remind you, this is not even how we elect presidents. We elect presidents state by state. So the national popularity vote or the national poll, it doesn't matter. You can lose the national election and still win state by state by state. But even then, Donald Trump is up, even after all the Kamala Harris hoopla. And Republicans never lead in the national polling. They're always behind in the national polling. The last time a Republican president won the White House and won the national popular vote was in 2004. All right. That's just not something that matters, except that if Democrats are behind, it matters big time to them.
The massive change is actually the change of candidates, because prior to Biden dropping out, he trailed by 6 points in these exact same polls that we look at here, where Harris was only trailing by 2 points. So the movement is actually from Biden to Harris, not actually Harris herself necessarily moving.
There you go. One last thing here, and I just want you to see this back to the black voters and how here's the thing. One of these polls will show that black voters are now finding Kamala Harris more popular than they did Joe Biden. Big deal. The fact is, if a Democrat doesn't win 90% of the black vote, they're done. They're just finished. It's kaput. This is a vote. They've always relied on this. They've always taken it for granted. And that should be the baseline. That should be the foundation that you've got when you're building your national coalition. So I want you to watch this moment from a Zoom call. This was made public. Anton Daniels, who is a podcaster and political commentator, he's on this Zoom call with all these other, streamers, where one of the women says that she's voting for Kamala Harris because she's a black woman. That's it. She said, sorry, she's a black woman, so I'm going to vote for her. And watch how this turns. And these are influencers. These are influencers in the African-American community.
I'm going to just be real honest with this. She's a black woman.
Yeah, because they skin folk, not Kim folk.
I think it goes back to what somebody was saying, where it's not voting for someone, but majority will vote for somebody else just.
Hold on. Let me mind this out.
I think majority
is it only because she a black woman.
Yeah.
Do you not see how that's a bad idea?
Elaborate.
Okay, so we're in 3 proxy wars with some of the most powerful leaders in the world. She failed at the border, in which we have an estimation of 15 to 20 million people illegally into this country. That is literally overtaking and bankrupting Chicago to the tune of over $400 million per year, and they are in a deficit. Oakland is going out of business. San Francisco, ditto. California, $65 billion deficit. New York, they're literally cutting trash, in which they are the rattiest, dirtiest city, and they've taken up resources as far as free healthcare, free hotels to the tune of $600 a day. They're literally taking over your schools. Your taxpayer dollars are going to fund the migrant crisis. She was supposed to be in charge of this. We have a failing economy. Every single day I see people getting on the internet talking about $30 an hour is the new minimum wage because inflation is fucking out of control. At one point, it was at almost 10%, depending on what city that you were in. She has no policy, no record to stand on. One of the biggest things that she did in her career was lock up more black men than ever before. But we sitting here and vote her in office on identity politics. The very person that she was under as far as the president of the United States of America, she called him racist during the debate, which shows you how fake she is. And the only thing that we can stand on from a policy perspective is whether or not she's black and she's a woman. We did that during the Obama administration, and he didn't do anything for black people. As a matter of fact, y'all complain because the only person that he did, or the only group of people that he really stood for is the alphabet community, and that's his landmark thing that he's still standing on today. So the only thing that we have to stand on is identity politics. That shit didn't work with Tiffany Henyard in Dayton, Illinois. It didn't work with Karen Bass. It didn't work with Lori Lightfoot in Chicago. It didn't work with Brandon Johnson that then took over her position in Chicago. It didn't work with Andre Dickens in Atlanta. It didn't work with Eric Adams in New York. It doesn't work across the country. Every single Democratic city is a hellhole. And we sitting here talking about identity politics?
I mean, I don't know about you, but I just subscribed to Anton Daniels' YouTube channel. That is fantastic. It's brilliant. It's exactly how you're supposed to respond to people who say, well, yeah, I don't really care about the issues, but I think it's just time for a woman. I'm sorry. As my friend Dan Bongino would say, it's not QT time right now. Okay. There's some serious stuff going on in this country. Beyond serious. And if you're still back there, if it's 2008 for you, and you just like the fact that you can change your Facebook page and it makes you feel good about yourself, you're ruining the country. You are literally ruining the country. This is a terrible candidate. And honestly, the only thing she's got going for her right there is what you saw, is that she's a black woman. And there are some people who are still clinging on to identity politics, and it's not going to end well. Things are way too serious now here. The beauty of Barack Obama doing that in 2008 is that he came off 8 years of relative prosperity in this country and peace. Not peace internationally, of course, but in our country. I mean, we didn't have the crime on our streets. We didn't have the insanity that we've got right now. The financial crisis, which almost seemed manufactured, happened just in time for Barack Obama to promise everybody hope and change. And well, look what that got us. That was fantastic. And that, what you just saw, that's why Kamala Harris and the Democrats are very worried about solid foundational voting groups that they used to rely on. They didn't have to do anything to get them. And now they don't have them. Not the way they used to. Over the weekend. Nah, it wasn't over the weekend. Let me try that again. Last week, there was a big Zoom thing for Kamala Harris called White Women for Harris. Was it white women or white chicks for Harris? What'd they call this thing, Kevin? They don't call themselves chicks, right? Unless they're doing it for themselves, you know.
No, you had it right the first time. It's White Women for Harris.
White women. All right. White Women for Harris. And it was a fascinating insight and how liberal white women talk with each other about politics, especially in the post-racial era that we live in right now. The fact that you're even having a presentation to raise money and talk politics labeled white women for Harris is sort of, giving away exactly how racially biased and racially conscious you are as a group. But one person was called upon to speak that I really want you to see because her presentation is going viral for all the right reasons. Her name is Ariel Fodor. I'll tell you who she is in a minute, but watch her lecture her fellow white women for Harris about how they should be conducting themselves over the next 100 days.
Ariel Fodor, affectionately known as Mrs. Frazzle to her combined audience of over 1.5 million followers, is here to help gentle parent us through this election.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I am so honored to speak today. I am like shaking to just be among such incredible company. We are here because, as if you were here earlier, you've heard BIPOC women have tapped us in as white women to step up, listen, and get involved this election season. This is a really important time, and we all need to use our voices and influence for the greater good. No matter who you are all influencers in some way. So tonight, I'm going to share some do's and don'ts for getting involved in politics online and navigating the toxicity that comes with it. And spoiler alert, as much as the toxicity can come from the outside, it can come from us too. So first, don't isolate yourself. We can do our best work when we're in community together like we are tonight, because the toxic feels smaller when we support each other. But don't make it about yourself. As white women, we need to use our privilege to make positive changes. If you find yourself talking over or speaking for BIPOC individuals, or God forbid, correcting them, just take a beat. And instead, we can put our listening ears on. So do learn from and amplify the voices of those who have been historically marginalized and use the privilege you have in order to push for systemic change. As white people, we have a lot to learn and unlearn. So do check your blind spots. You are responsible for your algorithm, believe it or not.
So, I gotta be honest with you. We go through a big selection process here when we choose the videos that we present to you and comment on. And it's a constant struggle because I want you to see stuff like this, but I'm loath to put something out there that I know is going to repel you in some way because that was repulsive. But you need to see it for a couple of reasons. First of all, I want you to recognize that if Kamala Harris wins, what you just saw, that is the next 4 years of your lives. Right there. These suburban white women with advanced degrees talking to you literally like you're a kindergartner. And I mean literally because this is her shtick. She's a viral TikTok influencer who is also a kindergarten teacher. That's why she talks like that, because she's a kindergarten teacher and she treats everybody in her life like they're 5 years old. Imagine her poor husband. So that entire cadence, the words we're being infiltrated by, oh, the BIPOC women have tapped us in. Let's check our white privilege. That's the next 4 years of your life if Kamala Harris wins. This woman and legions like her will be running your lives. You've been warned. White women for Harris. That's what it looked like. And apparently, they're also doing a white dudes for Harris tonight. Yeah, in fact, here, check this out.
Congressman Adam Schiff, lots of bidders, right? You've got some big Democratic names who are set to be on this Zoom call. You have David Hogg, who is with us right now. You have Roy Cooper, the former governor of North Carolina. You have Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, Congressman Adam Schiff, lots of big names. And, the right?
Super big names. That is really exciting. White dudes for Harris. That's going to be happening tonight. I feel like we need to jump on that, Kevin, you and I, and be a part of it. Also, by the way, my favorite thing about white dudes for Kamala White Dudes for Harris. Have you seen that over on the Harris for President campaign website, or is it still Biden for President? You can buy your own White Dudes for Kamala tank top. Have you seen this? Yeah, let me show it to you real fast because it's really impressive. Here it is. I shared it over on my X account. Yeah, there it is. The White Dudes for Harris tank top. And you can see right there the model. The model posing with the White Dudes for Harris shirt is actually a black dude. That's as inclusive as you're ever going to get in America. It doesn't get more inclusive than that, or asinine for that matter. Hey, we need to sell the White Dudes for Harris t-shirt. Get a model for it. Okay, how about this guy? Perfect. It's just, you can't. I wish we had made this up. It would have made me happy. I wish we were that smart and clever. But no, they're just that stupid. So at the same time, they're doing this whole white girls for Kamala and talking like they're kindergarten teachers, literally, and even worse, talking to you like you're a kindergartner and telling you about how you have to check your privilege and you have to, oh, for God's sake, don't correct a BIPOC. Listen and understand with that. Okay, I wanted to say to our kindergarten teacher, God forbid we correct a BIPOC, but what if they're wrong? What do you do if they're wrong? What kind of kindergarten teacher do you think she is if she doesn't correct her students if they're BIPOC? All right, so then they got that. You got your white girls, you got your white dudes, and they're talking like that to each other and building all this really exciting momentum of these insufferable white people for Kamala Harris. But there's none more insufferable and insipid as Eric Swalwell. And I guess they've come up with these little Gen Zers on the Harris campaign who handle the social media. They've come up with this really brilliant political tactic against J.D. Vance. Are you ready? They're calling him weird. Yeah, it's literally a fourth grade insult. J.D. Vance is weird.
Who knows how to be serious, but not take themselves so seriously.
Do you have a favorite vice presidential pick for her, or a vice presidential pick among the several names being discussed that you think would be the smartest pick for the Democrats?
You know, when it comes to the vice presidential sweepstakes, there's one name that I keep focusing on, J.D. Vance. He absolutely cannot be the vice president of the United States. And so anyone she picks will be eminently more qualified than a guy who thinks that if you're a single, hardworking woman in America, you should have to pay more in taxes. Again, this is just bizarre, doesn't make any sense. And by the way, if you are single and you meet someone and you want to start a family, J.D. Vance doesn't support you using IVF to start that family. And say, unfortunately, you start a family and your spouse becomes violent. He has said that he thinks that you should be forced to stay in a violent marriage. So I don't think Kamala Harris is going to pick anyone as weird and creepy as J.D. Vance. She has a blessing of talented candidates to choose from, and I look forward to hearing from that selection committee.
Eric Swalwell coming somebody else weird and creepy is, I mean, sort of the epitome of the pot and the kettle syndrome, number one. Number two, see this guy's face during that whole thing, how he looked like he was about to break up laughing because he was so charmed by the brilliance and witticism of one Eric Swalwell. His name's Jim Sciutto. He works for CNN. What they don't tell you is right before he got a job at CNN in 2017 to cover the Trump administration, he was working in the John Kerry State Department during the Barack Obama administration. It's amazing how that works, isn't it? Yeah, he was an official at the State Department under the Barack Obama presidency, and then CNN welcomes him with open, and now he gets to put on a suit and tie and get the anchorman haircut. He's almost indistinguishable from Jake Tapper, who also used to work for a congressman on Capitol Hill, a Democrat. By the way, somebody whose child married Chelsea Clinton. Yeah, that's who Jake Tapper owes his political career to. But of course, I just getting petty now, pointing out how they're all Democrats and they're all on the same team and they're all cosplaying anchors and TV personalities when they're actually still political operatives. But that's why Jim Sciutto has this shit-eating grin on his face, because he's just so happy he can do something to help the team advance the ball down the field. But back to Eric Swalwell calling J.D. Vance creepy and weird. Eric Swalwell calling anybody else on the planet creepy and weird. But this whole meme was created over the weekend. J.D. Vance is weird. And it did. It came from the Kamala Harris campaign. This was a talking point and a meme they created that they put out because J.D. Vance is weird. That's what they say. J.D. Vance is weird. Yeah. Yeah, J.D. Vance is weird. Yeah, you don't want any weirdness like J.D. Vance is weird. You know, college grad, Marine Corps, retired, went to the Ivy League. I mean, the weirdest thing he did was go to the Ivy League, actually. I wish he hadn't done that. Best-selling author, screenwriter, U.S. Senator. He's weird. Really weird. Not like the people that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris surround themselves with. Normal, everyday Americans, like, you know, their former nuclear scientist. But Gretchen Whitmer, also kind of strange herself. She picked up on the J.D. Vance's weird thing.
This morning. Let's talk about this new race and that new talking point, weird or weirdos, however you want to put it. Tell us, do you agree with that assessment? And why do you think it's breaking through?
Well, it's quite a jarring segue. Weirdos and freaks. Here's Governor Whitmer. I think that my colleagues are pointing out the obvious, that the agenda, the way they talk to people, the way they address people, it is bizarre. It's weird. It is weird. I also don't want to diminish the fact, though, that it also presents a very real risk for us as a country. And weird is kind of a funny phrase to use because it's bizarre, but at the same moment, we've got to say this is a serious moment in this country. I am proud to be a co-chair of the Harris campaign because my candidate is offering us a brighter future, a focus on how she's going to make people's lives better. This perpetual, I think, aim to divide us and to inflame us and to anger us and to stoke hate is what's so dangerous in this country right now. And
it's dangerous to divide us and to stoke hate in this country. Moments after spending over a minute talking about how Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are weird. And did you notice after going on and on and on about how weird they are, they're weird the way they talk to people and what they think and what they believe. They're just weirdos. They're weirdos, weird. But let's talk about Kamala Harris for a moment. So then she does for a moment.
A focus on how she's going to make people's lives better. This perpetual, I think.
Yeah, that was it. 10 seconds. Well, she's focused on how we're going to make our people's lives better. Now, back to the weirdos who are constantly dividing us. And nowhere does it register in their little weird brains, if I may use their word, that everything they do and everything they say is literally dividing us. They can't talk about the positives of their candidate. They can't tell us who she is or what she stands for without actually making about what she's not. Here's who Kamala Harris is. She's not that weirdo Donald Trump and J.D. Vance who are constantly dividing us. Well, wait a second. By calling your political opponent weirdos who are dividing us, aren't you, in fact, dividing us? I mean, you know that half of the country supports them. And so by labeling them as weirdos, you're saying that half of the country supports weirdos or fascists or Hitler or whatever pejorative that you want to throw in there, because it is the campaign of pejoratives. Every single instance, you watch it, you look out for it, and it's all you'll see. Now that I've pointed it out to you, look at Kamala Harris's very first political ad. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna call an audible, Kevin. We're gonna look at it right now because it's absolutely the perfect example of what we're talking about. Hang on. I'm searching it on X, so I know that I'll actually get a good result. The very first presidential ad for Kamala Harris. Hang on. Now that's there's a lot of parodies out there now that I think about it. I probably should go to her. I should go to her official site. Hang on. This is what we get for doing things on the fly and calling audibles, isn't it, Kevin? Go ahead, say it. You can yell at me while I'm doing this.
Nothing wrong with this.
All right, here it is. So this is the very first official presidential ad from Kamala Harris. It's right there on her official account. And I want you to, and I'm telling you, the second I point this out to you, it's the only thing you'll be able to see. They literally cannot go 10 seconds saying something nice about her and positive about her and her vision for the country without immediately sliming you, a Republican or a conservative or a Trump supporter, or just somebody who thinks that their ideas are wrong. Watch how she does it. This is her very first ad as a candidate.
In this election, we each face a question. What kind of country do we want to live in? There are some people who
There you go. 10 seconds. What did I tell you? Look at the mark. There you go. 11 seconds. And they immediately come up with the scare music and the some people. And they're claiming that Trump and Republicans represent chaos and division. And look at how they present themselves. 10 seconds. And by the way, I said, they can't go 10 seconds saying anything positive about themselves. She literally said nothing about herself or about what she's going to do or about what her policies are, or God forbid she spend any time talking about her accomplishments. It's immediately dividing us. It's us and them. And this is why we're in the state that we're in right now in this country. Well, this and people like Chelsea Handler. Moronic, mean-spirited, very angry, but rich and famous people who further divide us over and over again. They're very upset that J.D. Vance made a flip offhand comment about back when he wasn't even a politician, about that there seems to be an inordinate number of childless women, often single women, who are determining policies in this country that affect parents and their children. And I think that's worthy of having a conversation about. Well, women like Chelsea Handler, who is exactly the kind of person J.D. Vance has described, well, she isn't happy about that. So watch how she goes after the weirdo J.D. Vance. Just look at this woman's face, look at her behavior, watch how she acts, and recognize the irony of her calling somebody else a weirdo.
Oh, hey! As you might have heard, Donald Trump's running mate and future star of his own Dateline episode, J.D. Vance, is ruffling quite a few feathers this week.
We're effectively run in this country by a bunch of childless cat ladies who look at Kamala Harris. The entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
Listen up, you wingnut elegy. This country is still controlled by men in systems that were set up by men that are carefully crafted to continue to benefit men. So to put it in women-hating terms, you'll understand you're being hysterical. But let's be clear, there's no correlation between childless people and the presidency. For example, our very first United States president, Mr. George Washington, didn't have children. In fact, he had 2 stepchildren. That's right, just like someone else I know. And to your point about Kamala not being fit because she's not a mother, I'd like to remind you that no president in the history of the United States has ever been a mother. But maybe if she had 5 kids with 3 different men and a scandalous affair with a porn star and was convicted felon, that would be more palatable to Republican men. I mean, my God, are we tired? You sad, diet, Mountain Dew drinking, couch humping, dolphin porn aficionado, all of us childless cat and dog ladies are going to go from childless and crushing it to childless and crushing you in November. And before you tell me he didn't really fuck a couch, spare me. I grew up in New Jersey in the 80s where everyone had a couch in their basement, and I know a couch fucker when I see one.
There you go. So, again, just so you know, they're the unity party. They're not divisive at all. They're all about harmony, holding hands, and singing Kumbaya so that we can, march toward the sunrise as one nation under God. Oop, did I say God? You're not allowed to say that with them. And you're the divider. You're the one who's actually pitting us against each other. You're the reason why we have such anger and chaos in our country. They really believe that and then put out crap like that. It's really something to behold. Either they're absolute, consummate, earnest liars, who can just look at you straight in the face, knowing the truth, and yet in a psychopathic way, deliver a lie as if it was really coming from the heart. Or they're complete and total morons who don't know the truth. Either way, you want them leading you? Joe Biden is still president of the United States. Remember him, Joe Biden? Yeah, whatever happened to that guy? Well, on his way out the door as the lamest of all lame ducks, who forget about not running for re-election, he's not running for, the bathroom when he can't hold it any longer. He's just doing his business in his pants. I mean, that's how lame this duck is. Joe Biden, on his way out the door, is going to exercise extra constitutional power and try to change the judicial branch of the United States of America. That would be a separate but co-equal branch with legislative and executive. So you might wonder, how can he possibly do that unilaterally? Come on, man. Don't give me all that malarkey. I'm Joe effing Biden. I can do whatever I want, right? Right, Hunter? Isn't that right? Yeah, that's right. So he's going to try this. And what does it actually look like? Well, our friends over at Fox have actually broken it down quite a bit for us, and I want to share some of it for you. Take a look.
Just announced proposals to reform the Supreme Court. This happening literally a minute ago. These would include
By the way, I'm so sorry, and I do love these guys, and I want them to go ahead and finish, but why must we constantly buy into the language of the left? This is not a proposal to reform the Supreme Court. First of all, I reject the premise that the Supreme Court requires reforming or any kind of reformation measures. Supreme Court is just functioning fine. Here's the thing. The left, look at, I let him go. How long did they go? 8 seconds. God damn it. I'm going to play the video, I promise. The left in this country for the last 70 years has politicized the judicial branch and specifically the Supreme Court. They have turned the Supreme Court into a political body. There was a time in this country where we didn't look at justices and say, oh, that's a Republican justice and that's a Democrat justice. That's a conservative. No, that's new. They have used the Supreme Court to push through policies that they could never get through in a legislative body with votes and the support of the people. So they used the Supreme Court to jam that through themselves. Finally, conservatives sort of got the picture and say, oh, I see. So you're going to legalize abortion and the killing of babies with Roe v. Wade at the Supreme Court level because you couldn't get votes to pass it as a law? Fine. Then we'll play your game. And election after election after election, we said we want conservative justices who will do away with Roe v. Wade. And it took about 40 years to finally get them, but we got them. And now they're like, oh my God, I can't believe the Supreme Court is politicized. This is awful. Who did this? We're trying to find the guy who did this, I say in my hot dog suit. So now we have to reform the Supreme Court because it's gotten too political. No, they want to fuck up the Supreme Court, not reform it. And it hasn't gotten too political. It's gotten just as political as they have made it. But the difference is they lost. They lost because we were smart enough to make presidential elections about that Supreme Court. And the majority of Americans don't want their justices. You want a Supreme Court full of Elena Kagans and Sonia Sotomayors? Or do you want a Supreme Court full of Clarence Thomases? And the American people overwhelmingly want Clarence Thomases. All right, so I'll let this start again. I just got triggered because the Fox News anchor, and I'm sure he's a lovely man, but you can't buy into their language. You can't buy into their narrative that, oh, it's Supreme Court justice. It's Supreme Court reforms. They're not reforms. They're not reforms.
Just announced proposals to reform the Supreme Court. This happening literally a minute ago. These would include no immunity for crimes a former president committed in office, term limits for Supreme Court justices, and a binding code of conduct for the Supreme Court. Joe Biden also releasing a new op-ed this morning saying in part, quote, "This nation was founded on a simple yet profound principle. No one is above the law. Not the President of the United States, not a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States, no one. I have overseen more Supreme Court nominations as senator, vice president, and president than anyone living today. I have great respect for our institutions and separation of powers. What is happening now is not normal, and it undermines the public's confidence in the court's decisions, including those impacting personal freedoms. We now stand in a breach. Katie Cherkasky is a constitutional law attorney and former federal prosecutor. She's here now to react. Katie, that's a mouthful. What's your reaction to those plans?
Well, these are very pie in the sky type of ideas. Nothing about the Supreme Court reforms could be immediately implemented, but it certainly shows the position of the Democrat Party. They don't like the outcome of the court's ruling, so they want to change the rules here. So many of these reforms would require, if not legislation, actual constitutional amendments. So again, not politically viable at the moment, but certainly a strong and radical position.
Yeah, such an important point that politically, this can never happen because a constitutional amendment requires all three branches of government. I mean, not the three branches, but you need the House, the Senate, and the president. You also need 38 of the 50 states to sign on. There are too many Republicans for this to work. But on the immunity front, let's focus on that. Isn't this a bill of attainder, basically creating a law, in this case, an amendment that targets one person, Donald J. Trump?
Well, I think that would certainly be the argument. And not only that, I think it's a very myopic position. The reason that SCOTUS came down with that immunity decision is because they considered the impact of the presidential office and the idea of prosecuting a president. And so to take away that idea through legislation, which again is not very feasible, would impact so many other things that it would not be a viable office. And essentially, there's separation of power issues all over the place and constitutional issues all over the place. So this is, again, just a political talking point, but a very extreme one, in my opinion.
Yeah, and furthermore, Greg Jarrett, who is one of the crack legal analysts over at Fox News, actually expands this even further. It's not just unconstitutional, it's not just wrong, but it's actually the kind of thing that makes a president go down in infamy, if I may say. I know everybody loves FDR. Franklin Roosevelt is a good, okay, fine. He had some flaws. And one of them was his own party rejected his attempt to do this exact same thing. When I was growing up learning American history, I was told that as fine a president as Franklin Roosevelt was, this was his biggest mistake. He should have never tried to do this because it was absolutely unconstitutional and showed him to have certain tendencies that lead toward authoritarianism or totalitarianism, you know, like Joe Biden. Here's Greg Jarrett.
Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett joins us right now. He's been chewing on this. Greg, whatever happened to separation of powers, judiciary, legislative, co-equal branches of government? The Congress can't tell the Supreme Court what to do, can they?
Yeah, and, like many of Joe Biden's ideas, most of it is unconstitutional, Steve. Democrats cannot simply pass a law imposing term limits on justices because life terms are embedded in the Constitution. So it requires amending the founding document, which is such a high bar that it has zero chance. Ironically, though, Joe Biden is calling for an amendment to override the presidential immunity decision. Again, that may sound like catnip to liberals who hate the ruling, although they shouldn't. It protects Democrat presidents like Joe Biden. That would still take years and the kind of political capital they just don't have. Right. And then finally, Joe's other idea of imposing ethical controls on justices, as you point out, Steve, that is a blatant violation of the separation of powers principles. So all of this is just electoral pablum for Democrats.
Sure, they're trying to motivate their base, the base was not very excited until Kamala Harris came aboard, according to the latest polls. Speaking of Kamala Harris, she says she's open to expanding the Supreme Court. In March of 2019, she said this: "I'm open to this conversation about increasing the number of people on the U.S. Supreme Court." And Greg, that's what you do when you've lost some decisions, isn't it? You make it a political thing and you say, I'm going to fight back.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, we know how that worked for FDR in 1937. He tried to pack the court and it backfired spectacular. Every time Democrats see a decision they don't like, They threaten the Supreme Court. And sometimes people like Chuck Schumer and Liz Warren literally stand in front of the court and engage in dangerous rhetoric. I find it interesting that Joe Biden has spent decades opposing the very kind of radical reforms that he now advocates. And it's also pretty amusing, Steve. An 81-year-old president wants to age out younger high court justices that are a lot more sentient than Joe Biden is. Biden knows he can't do this, but like many of the things he proposes, he does it anyway to troll for votes.
Yeah, and I'll just end this as well with one other observation, a brilliant one. Greg Jarrett is one of the best over there. Yeah, Joe Biden deciding to age out justices at the age of 81, where he's just been aged off of the ticket. Maybe this is his revenge because he's bitter over what Barack Obama allegedly did to threaten the 25th Amendment to get him to step aside for Kamala Harris. But not only that, not only the age out thing, but the term limit situation. You know, Joe Biden was a senator from 1972 to 2009 without a term limit to be seen. And now he wants to impose term limits on Supreme Court justices. And the only reason is because they don't like the decisions that have been made. That's it. It has nothing to do with any actual reality about how the Supreme Court should function properly or effectively or efficiently. It has to do with them being butthurt because they lost. And they didn't just lose at the Supreme Court. They lost because Hillary Clinton was their nominee. That's really what this is all about. You remember, Antonin Scalia died suddenly in February of 2016 during the presidential election year. And Mitch McConnell, say what you will about him, but his ability to keep that Supreme Court justice chair empty the entire presidential election year, refusing to buckle under to political pressure and pressure from the media to hold confirmation hearings for Barack Obama's selection, Merrick Garland, who's now a disaster of an attorney general. That one move from Mitch McConnell immediately made the presidential election of November 2016 about who will fill that empty seat. Donald Trump won that and then filled that seat and two more seats. So make no mistake, the reason they're so angry, the reason they're so bleeding from their eyes upset over the Supreme Court, the reason that Joe Biden is now leading the charge in this unconstitutional, totalitarian manner to completely warp the Supreme Court, the reason they're doing this is because Hillary Clinton lost the election in 2016. And that's your feel-good thought for the day. We'll be back next time, same place. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for liking. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for your comments. Just thanks for being you. I'm Larry O'Connor. You can call me Larry.